I have just started the recording. David, next slide, please. So those of you who are working group members, we ask that you rename yourselves in Zoom so that your name begins with WG, as shown on the screen here. Again, raise your hand to participate, stay on mute when not speaking, and especially the first time that you speak, please state your name and affiliation, and then provide your comment. And again, a reminder that as with past meetings, the presentation, the meeting notes, and recording will be posted to the Russian River Water Forum website. Thanks everyone who's renaming there. And again, so that we can keep the conversation sort of a single thread of conversation going, we ask that you use the chat only for technical assistance. I'll be monitoring that as we go, so I encourage, so please, if you have a substantive comment to make, please make that verbally. Raise your hand and I will call on you. All right, and just wanted to acknowledge the work of the drafting team, David Tabor, Phil Williams, and Kristen Peer, and the core team, which has met a couple of times to review the drafts of the work product. It's Nicole Whipple, Brenda Tamaris, Matt Clifford, and Adrian Garialdi. And also a special thanks to Sam Boland Bryan for his help with technical review and other input.
And I think that's it.
I believe that's it. I will turn it over to David, who is going to be leading the presentation of the work product. So we'll go slide by slide. And again, if you have comments, please raise your hand and I will call on you in turn. Thanks very much.
Thanks everybody for taking time today. We have a little bit of a problem that we have 20 odd slides, but there's no way in the world we'd ever get through them all in an hour. So the basic idea is I've culled through and tried to come up with the 5 or 6 slides that I think really will be the most interesting to everybody. They're the sort of turning points of the presentation. Yes, there are topics that we won't discuss today. That's what Wednesday's session will be about. So we have a time budget of, 5-ish minutes per slide. If it turns out there's a lot of energy around a slide, unless you all say, oh yeah, let's drill down on this, we'll push that off to Wednesday to continue the discussion. Hopefully folks can make that. I realize this is a substantial amount of time on your calendar, but to have a good, honest conversation takes a while. So bear with us, and we'll, I think basically on each slide, I'll sort of say, here's what the slide's about, you'll see it, and then we'll have discussion and see how long that goes. That seems fair enough. Let me move on here. So the first sort of before I go on, there are several places in the slide deck where there's a hole. We simply don't have good information. It would be nice if we did. And if you have information that is pertinent, please email it to me or to Jim so we can include it. But we've tried to remove as much speculation and as much iffy information as possible, because there's nothing that will blow credibility more than questionable information. So with that, first slide is basically talking about things the way they were before the dams were even here. We have a few factoids. There's a couple of question marks. A question mark means it's the best we got. I wish we had better. When you see TBD, that means we don't know, and we probably won't know for a while. And you'll find TBDs in many slides, but it's better not to speculate. And with that, we basically show the upper Eel River, that's above the Dos Rios confluence, and the upper Russian River. These actually are contemporary photos. The upper Eel is around 1900. The one in the Russians about 1880 near Healdsburg. So this is basically to set the stage of what was it like life before we even put the dams up. Conversation.
I would open up to questions or comments. If anyone would like to raise a hand. Beth, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. On the appropriative water rights, I wonder if it would be interesting to include, if you have the information, approximately what amount of use. So probably you don't have that, but maybe the face
I
value
don't
or
think
anything
so.
like that.
Well, what we can guess at is the number of people. And again, this is at best a guess. Trust me, we're looking for facts, and it's hard to get these approximations from 120 years ago. But that's the idea of the how many people did this support. And I don't believe there were any meters worth talking about back then in terms of the appropriative.
Okay.
I'm not even
Thanks for the
sure that
question,
water
Beth.
rights were recorded back then.
No, actually there were.
Okay. So Glenn, you're next with your hand, and then we have Laurel and then Charlie.
Yeah, one thing that's not there in the Upper Eel is it supported a very productive fishery and several canneries.
Sort of the Russian. The Russian had at least one cannery on it.
Then both should be indicated that they both supported primarily Chinook canneries and productive fisheries.
Okay. On the Upper Eel, was it multiple canneries or just one? Again, about those.
I could dig in. There actually are some historical reconstructions, and I could dig in to sources.
I mean, it's
around 1900 and earlier. There were productive canneries, and there was an active fishery all up and down the coast, particularly around the Fort Bragg area.
Absolutely. So don't spend a lot of time on. It's just, was it 1, 2, or was it dozens on the Upper Eel? That would be.
It was more than one,
compelling.
I do believe, but I can check that. There are historical records and reconstructions. I've got a couple of those sources. I'll get you some numbers.
Okay.
I don't know if it'll be precisely at 1900.
This is
1899.
Plus or minus, plus or minus 20 years is fine. It's not 20 years, but we just want it before the dams were in.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, Glenn. Laurel.
Yeah, just commenting on the disconnected pools. There's just as much evidence that the river channel went dry as there is of it having disconnected pools. So I would add that it went dry many summers.
Is that just the Russian?
Yeah, I don't know about the eel. I would imagine it probably did too, but I don't have any evidence of that, so I don't know.
Yeah, if you can email me the evidence, I'll change the wording. Because
I mentioned this already to you. There's a very thorough, lengthy report on the Russian River done by an independent science review panel.
I've read it, but I missed that one. All I saw was disconnected pools.
No, there's an entire account of people hiking up a dry channel in the 1800s. So it was definitely going dry all the time too.
I missed that one. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurel. Next, Charlie, and then Terry. Charlie.
Yeah, could you just clarify that? I don't understand the supported, X number of people in either basin. Is that like, are you just making a guess pegged to a specific timeline or date?
About 1900, and we're doing our best estimate. If you have a better one, we're all over it.
Nope, just looking for clarification. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, Terry McCartney.
Oh, hi, good afternoon, and thank you, everybody. I wonder if we want to use a little bit different verbiage too, because the river doesn't actually go dry, it goes underground. And I think it's important to remember that the water is still there, it's just underground.
That's why I'd originally gone for disconnected pools, because it gets the point across that, hey, this isn't a river flowing, but that doesn't mean there isn't water. But this is tricky, right? But I do appreciate that, absolutely. And the aquifer doesn't go dry immediately either. Okay, I think in timeland, we're sort of, we need to move on, if that's okay. Next one is what is required in terms of flows for the Russian. Now, my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that once the dams are removed, there won't be any regulatory flows on the eel. The eel will be the eel. So we only talked about it here. And the idea is to simply say, look, before you get to water rights, there are things that need to be satisfied. And there's a lot of overlapping regulations and different federal agencies as well as state that can mandate various conditions on the river. Discussion on this?
Okay, take a moment to read it and then Glenn first and then Charlie.
Actually, there are similar mandates on the eel. The biological opinions, for instance, they may have been more recent, but they're still there. While it's scenic river status is another, Clean Water Act is another. So both rivers have mandates for minimum flows of some sort. And the problem is they may be in conflict.
Well, that's true, but once the dams are gone, how would you satisfy the minimum flows?
Well, the ESA requirement flows, TMDL flows, wild and scenic river flows are still going to be in place after the dams are gone. Those are independent of dams.
Okay, so on the, I need to take notes. Hold a second. Okay, I got the note.
I would think you would say both the Eel River and
both
Russian
rivers.
River.
Absolutely correct. I mean, obviously the quantities are different, but the principle applies.
Yeah.
Good add. Okay.
Thanks, Glenn. Next, Charlie.
Yeah, and I mean, I almost wonder if we can get a little more specific here. I don't know who from Sonoma Water, if anyone is on the call today, but you know, this is, I see Pam's there, but I mean, this is, you know, we have some information around well, at least what's being undertaken now in terms of updating the Russian River biop. I mean, I think that the timeline on that is unclear to me anyway, but you know, the folks at Sonoma Water have a good handle on this and could probably provide some more specifics, at least on the Russian side.
Yeah, I think it would only be on the Russian. Remember that I forgot to mention this. Our assumption is that the audience here is the general public, and it's so easy to get too specific. And the slide deck is already really long, so it's not that I'm rejecting it's just a matter of we have to strike a balance, because we're just trying to get concepts across that a lot of people aren't aware of at all. The idea of a minimum in-stream flow, that's a new idea for a lot of the audience.
Charlie, any follow up on that?
No, that's fine. I appreciate that clarification.
Okay, great, thanks. Glenn, is that a new hand from you?
Yeah, new hand.
Yep.
Just to be consistent, if we're talking about both Russian and eel, in the first bullet point, the second bullet point, we should say some mandates.
Oh, good point. Yeah. Good catch.
Not to micromanage.
No, it's the sort of thing. It's easy to go blind on these presentations. We kind of need to move on to keep the things going. We also need to talk about tribal water rights before we talk about any other water rights. So the idea is we want to communicate that there's a lot of tribes here. Most people don't realize how many tribes there are. Now, obviously, Round Valley is by far the biggest, but we have a lot of little tribes on the Russian, and that the moment you have a federally recognized tribes, you get federally recognized water rights as well. It reserves them, and those can be the most senior of all. They aren't necessarily, but they typically are. And other tribes may have different water rights and gain water rights over time. I don't know how frequently this happens, but new tribes are recognized not fairly frequently, but it happens. So I think you can read the rest and time for discussion.
Okay, we'll start with Brenda.
Hi. Just want to make one clarification. It's not so much being recognized as a tribe as having land put into trust. that then creates whatever reserved water rights are there.
So the federal reservation, should we say federally reserved land? Would that be a clarification, or would that make it worse?
Yeah, well, because all federally reserved land has implied water rights. I mean, whether it's a, military base or forest or whatever, so that would work, I think, perfectly fine.
Okay. Cool. Other input?
Right, not seeing any
Okay.
other hands here.
Okay. Now, this is where things get tricky because it actually requires some explanation. So for categories of water right, the picture looks very different on the eel and the Russian. The eel is really straightforward. I'm sure there's some twists we've left out, but comparatively, it's simple. That is to say, riparian lands that are right by the river have priority, and the appropriative water rights are a lower priority. Within riparian, there's no relevant dates. One riparian water right is evidently as good as another. In appropriative, it's by date. So the more senior you are, the less vulnerable you are to any kind of issue when it comes to a water shortage. So that's the simple case. In the Russian River, there's actually far more complexity than this, but we've tried to boil it down. That you have the priority of riparian first, sure, and you have the priority of appropriative sort of by date, but there is a special set of water rights surrounding 1949. Everybody has access to natural flow. With PVP transferred water, the riparian rights don't have a right to that, but everybody who is post 1905 in the appropriative has a right to the transferred water. Interestingly, the Lake Mendocino stored water, you can see, is much more limited in terms of who has the right to it. It's basically Sonoma Water and the Russian River Flood Control District. And you have to be a little special customer in order to get access to the Lake Mendocino water. It introduces this concept of different colors of water. So if there's enough natural flow, everybody gets access. But the moment the natural flow gets very, very low on the Russian, surprise, surprise, that would be summertime, then all of a sudden the water rights aren't quite so obvious. And people may think they have entitlement to water that they don't. So just because you have a water right doesn't mean that you have access to the water flowing by you because of these different colors of water. This is a distinction between water rights on the one side and water availability on the other. And it's water availability that gets constrained. Questions? Discussions?
Because
Brenda,
Brenda,
is
is
your
that
hand still up?
I think that's a legacy hand.
Todd?
Yes, I would just say the note there for R for the reservation in Lake Mendocino, that it's clarified that the 10,000, it says 10,000 AF acre feet would be called Sonoma County Reservation instead of just reserve. And that just makes it clear kind of that.
And I should probably spell out acre feet. So AF reserve
change to Sonoma
should
County
be acre feet Sonoma County Reservation. And is it actually called a reservation or is it called something else?
It's a storage reservation, yeah.
Okay, because we're using the word reservation in two different, we just use reservation in a different way. So we'll figure that out.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, I got several more hands up. Next to Charlie.
I would, given the amount of space you have on the page, I would just encourage you to put the R and WC text into that cell and just make that table larger, if that makes sense. I just think it'd be more clear.
That'll be interesting. Yeah, let me see if we can play with that. We're going to give our graphic artists some challenges here.
Yeah.
So maybe put footnotes in the cell. Okay, let's see if we can. Let's figure out if the graphic artist can do better than I did.
Okay. Thanks, Charlie. Next to Beth.
Yeah, are you going to call out pre-14 in addition to the pre-49? It may be the same checkboxes, but I think it's important to identify pre-14s differently.
But the checkboxes are the same, you say?
They may be, I'd have to think about it, but I think because in this watershed, it's so stressed, the priority of pre-14s, that I think not calling it out could be a little less clear.
Well, there's another trick, which is, and this involves endless legalisms that I want to be a part of, but there's also people prior to 1905, which is when the dam was not the dam, when the power plant was first put in or first proposed legally. There's a distinction between the people in 1905 and 1914 as well, and that's a source of endless heartburn. So
I haven't heard about that one, unfortunately.
yeah, so
or fortunately.
Yeah, right. So
I just think it's worth putting in the pre-14 line to help be consistent with a lot of the descriptions that we have of water rights generally. And you may address that in other slides, I don't know. Also, okay. And regarding Todd's comment about the 10,000 acre foot, I caught that as well, but could I suggest you sticking with the word reserve instead of reservation because of the two meanings?
yeah, I'm all over that. Yeah, as long as no one gets upset with calling it a reserve, I would prefer to.
Todd, does that sound okay to you?
Yeah, I don't think I have a problem with that reserve reservation. Yeah, so it's all tying to the same thing.
Got it. Great. Thanks, Beth, for those comments. And I think we're next to Charlie. Oh, Charlie.
Sorry, I was done.
You're done? Okay. Next to Glenn. And then Matt.
Yeah, there's probably an intermediate slide in there, but there needs to be something to the point that there are preemptive water obligations and limitations before you even get to state water rights, mostly federal. ESA, tribal obligations, Clean Water Act and TMDL obligations, Wild and Scenic River obligations, and various federal land reserves like Forest Service or local campgrounds, whatever. They're all federal statutes or federal reserves of water before you even get to the state water rights system. There needs to be a bridging slide somewhere in between.
Okay.
You may have that already. We've talked about that. You're dealing with only a selection, sort of.
Correct.
Stop signs.
But I think your point's well taken, that we need to mention that it's not just one or two things that are impinging on the supply, it's several.
Lots. Yeah.
And I just, is it fair to say that most of them actually are at the federal level rather than the state?
I think they are all at the federal level. ESA, tribal obligations are federal. Clean Water Act, TMDLs, those are federal. They're implemented by the states, but there's federal source.
Got it. Okay. We'll figure out a way to sharpen that.
And I'm reminded to include wild and scenic rivers as well.
And we do mention in the slide that you didn't see that the eel is a wild and scenic, and that federal wild and scenic, and that the Russian is a state scenic.
Exactly.
So we have that in there.
Good.
Need to move on. Now,
wait, actually, David, we had one more hand from Matt Clifford.
We did?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Like I say, I just wanted to respond on Beth's point. Hi, Beth. I hate to say this. A caveat. I would worry a little bit about pre-14s about adding more complexity to this slide. because there's so much detail. I understand pre-14 is an important distinction, but I'm not sure for the point that this slide is trying to get across that it is. And I think it might add confusion because there's not really a different status in this kind of what this slide's getting at as far as who's entitled to what flow. I don't think for pre-14. So I'm not dug in on this at all. I just want to make that comment. Like Dave, I think you've got like a little bit of a task there figuring out whether and how to put that nuance in there if you do. And I think that's all.
And just to poke fun of the situation, we did originally have it in there, and we took it out just because we're but at any rate. So okay, if I move on now.
Yeah, no hands. Right.
Okay. Next, this slide got a little more complicated, but I think the clarity was needed. This is the only point in the presentation we use the word diversion because we kind of have to. I would actually prefer that we just say no transfers, transfers. The problem is that I think we actually kind of have to use the word diversion here, but I'd be willing to change it. The no diversion, both scenarios are as defined and modeled by the two basin solution guys. Those models are being updated. And I'm not quite sure when they come, but given all we have now to work with is what they did back in 2019 time, we kind of have to go with that to be able to say hardly anything. On the diversion side, one thing that it may not be clear, but we want to make clear, is that, first of all, that even assuming that we have a diversion created, it happens only during some period, and we don't know what those periods are at this time. The idea is you do it when there's a lot of water flow on the eel, but I don't believe that that has been defined at this time. Perhaps more important to water rights holders on the Russian side is that the water that PVP produced up to now has been abandoned flow, which means nobody owns it, nobody controls it. It's just a good thing that it's there. And we've been depending on the kindness of strangers, that is to say PG&E, to provide that water. Well, that's not going to be there. The new diversion will not be abandoned flow. And that new flow will be managed by the regional entity. And we don't know what those terms and conditions might be. We don't know who's going to own the water, how it changes, whether water rights need to be somehow pegged to the new water flow rather than the abandoned flow. There's just a world of rat holes out there that we don't know at this time. But it ain't going to be the old world from a legalistic perspective. So with that, comments, questions?
Okay,
Just
turn over discussion. Matt, go ahead.
first, just a suggestion for clarity. If instead of no, if you think diversion's a bit, ambiguous or vague or something, you could say no transbasin diversion or transbasin diversion. That might be a little clearer as far as what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm not sure that would help. I mean, if we just say no transfer, that, or no water transfer, does that get to the same point?
Well, it does, but I think the problem you're trying to solve is there's lots of diversions out there, right? Well, which one are we talking about? But there's only one transbasin diversion, and I think
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Transfer is kind of a water rights term, which talks about maybe you're changing permits as opposed, and diversion is actually physical water, so it seems like it's better.
Yeah, I'd
okay.
go with that too. That rewording makes it clearer.
Agree.
A couple of plus ones to that, sounds like.
Okay.
Other
give me
comments
just a
on this
second.
one? Yeah.
Any other comments? It sounds like no. So let's keep on trucking.
I like your phrase, a world of rat holes.
It's the world I'm living in. Okay. So the next we have to talk about, and here we are using water transfer, that, okay, what do those two scenarios actually mean? Now, this is using historical data, what in the finance world we call back testing. That is not a terribly good predictor, but at least it gives you some indication of what the impacts would be. And just between us all on this call, if you took that same historical analysis and said, oh, how often would Lake Mendocino have drained, even when Mendocino wasn't there, right? Before 1958 or 1959, there wasn't a lake there. Over the entire 111 years, it would have only run dry once. So with the water transfer that is being contemplated, it empties about 13 years out of the 111 period. But without the water transfer, it's nearly half, almost exactly half of the years the lake empties. My understanding is even with full curtailments on the Russian side, it would still run dry in 20 years out of the 111. And other interventions are possible that would make it even less severe. But it's pretty clear that water transfer is pretty important to keeping that lake alive. I won't cover the footnotes, you can read those, but this I'm sure will involve some discussion.
All right, Laurel, please go ahead.
When I believe this is what you said, that when the lake was built, it wouldn't have gone dry without the PVP.
No. I'm sorry, I spoke too quickly. Before the lake was built, it would have run dry once, but that's because of PVP water. If it hadn't had PVP water, it would have run dry just like on a no water transfer side. So I apologize.
Okay, all right, better. On this double starred footnote, did you review the Ukiah Valley groundwater sustainability plan? Because that's a quantitative model that's pretty clear about how that aquifer gets recharged, and Lake Mendocino is not the main recharge mechanism. In fact, I don't think it's even identified as a recharge mechanism.
I did read it. Of course, I miss things. When you're reading thousands of pages, you do. But this is really talking about not just the Ukiah Valley, but the entire Russian River. So while it's true that there are some communities that don't depend on Lake Mendocino, when you get down across the county line, things get pretty ugly pretty fast. Now, we don't know what's going to happen because the river hasn't run dry since 1958. There was no reason for it to because Lake Mendocino was there.
So maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're talking about then. There's a difference between the river running dry and the aquifer and associated well levels being affected.
Exactly
Those are two
right.
very different things.
Exactly.
So in both the Alexander Valley and the Ukiah Valley, there's no reason to believe that you have to have releases out of Lake Mendocino for the aquifer to recharge. There's no studies that show that.
I understand that is being studied right now by USGS and Sonoma Water, specifically to answer this question. So that's why we put the quantitative model in 2024.
Okay, well, I think you should maybe use data that exists before expecting a different outcome from a study that's not done.
All I said was we don't know.
But we do know. We have a USGS study of Alexander Valley. We have a very detailed model of Ukiah Valley, and neither one of them says that the aquifer needs Lake Mendocino to be recharged. So yes, you might have a different model soon, but you're assuming it's going to say something different than the current studies. And I don't really think that you should say that.
Can you email me the references? Because I don't have a reference for the Alexander Valley.
Yeah, okay.
That'd be great.
Great. Thanks, Laurel. Next, Glenn, and then Robert.
Yeah, those models are, people will need to open those models up and look at the assumptions, but one of the assumptions is that there will be no change in management. And there's no change in management in the past. There will be no efforts to conserve water. There will be no efforts to use aquifer recharge, et cetera, et cetera. So there needs to be a big caveat underneath that this model assumes no changes in current management.
Well, that's what
That's the single biggest problem with all these is there are a lot of moving parts. If you don't move any of the parts, then you have basically the status quo. This is a status quo model.
Actually, it's
didn't- it
historical
didn't-
model, correct.
Yes, it didn't assume any efforts to get ourselves out of this problem.
Well, that's what these two sub-bullets are trying to get to, saying we can change our behavior and that will change the numbers, right? Big time.
Yeah, yeah, it would be a better presentation, I think, to have that a little bit bolder and a little more stated that this is assuming nothing changes. There are no management changes. It's clear that we have to make management changes one way or the other.
We'll need to figure out how to engineer.
Put it underneath it.
So give me just a moment. I need to take a note here.
Yeah, and David, I'm getting notes as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's better to have two copies. Sorry.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. And David, let us know when you're ready, and then we'll go to Robert.
I'm ready.
Okay, Robert, go ahead.
Yeah, just on Laurel's point about the aquifer conditions. It seems odd to even have it as a footnote to like the lake empties 56 out of 111 days. It seems like rather than even have it as a footnote, just have that as a separate line or separate statement that kind of unknown how aquifer conditions will be, changed due to these scenarios.
Okay, so we'll definitely, again, this is a slide that's graphically challenged and we'll need to figure out a better way of doing that. So maybe put the footnote in the body. Okay. Other hands?
We have Beth.
Yeah, Dave, I think for consistency's sake, stick with the trans-basin diversion instead of saying no water transfer. No trans-basin diversion or with trans-basin diversion. I think consistency is important. I think lake empties, I think you should call out Lake Mendocino because not everybody is completely familiar with
Well, it's in the
map.
title, but
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I didn't even catch that.
nobody reads my titles.
Sorry, they kind of blend into the background. And then full curtailments. Are you talking about surface water rights there?
This was, I believe, just using the riparian and appropriative, and not going beyond those.
Okay, this is a really, really nuanced, but while it has not been done in the Russian River watershed, there has been a case of groundwater curtailments by the state. So I don't know, maybe that's too nuanced.
Yeah, the word full is misleading. I don't know what else to do there. I'm just going to remove the word full because it doesn't really add anything other than a little bit of misguided information.
I mean, the whole thing, even with curtailments, 20 years out of 111 and other interventions possible. I think those two bullet points, I think I understand what you're getting at, but they may be a little bit more confusing than anything. I'd have to think about it. Because other interventions, is that FERO, is that the water sharing program, is that demand reduction, is that increased recycled water use? I mean, there's increased groundwater use. There's some, I don't really know where that's getting. And curtailments, that's such a nest, right, of complication because curtailments really cannot be, it's a legal term initiated by the State Water Board, cannot be done without emergency regulations, which cannot be done without a governor declaration of drought, which may not be, the conditions may not be met for drought in order to issue curtailments. So I don't know, maybe the simplest thing is to get rid of the two bullet points. I won't say that's what I'm recommending, but I think maybe people don't think about it to the level of nuance that I'm picking at. So
yeah, again, we're all unfortunately water nerds, and the audience for this
Right.
isn't. And there's a surprising amount going on in this slide, considering we're only trying to get a couple of points across. We need to figure out a
Yeah.
way to make it simpler, but also more meaningful.
Yeah. Good luck. Thank you for your work.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Thanks, Beth.
You just volunteered yourself.
Right.
I want to go on record as saying I did not volunteer myself.
When you put your hand up, what do you think that's for?
Okay.
Okay, and
Okay.
let's move on.
Yep.
Okay, we're skipping lots of slides. Trust me, there's all kinds of good stuff. But although this is visually very complex, we sort of need to show, okay, what does the water demand look like? And this is a snapshot, we believe, of 2019. And then if we continue the interbasin water transfer, what does life look like? And the basic idea is, in wet years, hey, we're good. In dry years, even though Lake Mendocino may not have filled during the prior winter, most of the time we'll be okay. And again, this is very much, I need to put a question mark next to this. We don't have a forecasting model. What we have is a historical model. And we don't know whether the new model comes out looking nicer or uglier. But this is the message here is, hey, here's what the water rights look like. If you look at it, there's a whole lot of post 49 water rights in comparison to the pre 49. And those are the ones that are going to be the most vulnerable. Interestingly, you didn't see this slide, but interestingly, most of the ag demand is actually in Mendocino County, not in Sonoma, because an awful lot of this river is in Mendocino County, right? Here's the county line, and you got a lot of ag up here that is using water. It's not the stuff in Sonoma that is the larger consumer. Okay, questions, discussion?
Okay. Let's start with Laurel.
On the
Laurel?
way you're adding this up, why are you calling out riparian separately? I mean, I like it better having agricultural, municipal, and industrial, so you can see how those two rank against each other. But riparian could be either one of those categories. Is it double counted?
I honestly don't know. I'm just a reporter here. I would be thrilled to leave out riparian because it means we don't have to present as much on the slide.
Well, where did this data come from?
Sonoma Water.
Oh, okay. Is it reporting data? Do you know? Or is
I
it?
believe it was. I believe it was from 2019.
Yeah.
Yes.
Todd, is that something you could speak to?
Are you asking me that question?
No, asking Todd Schramm.
Yeah, is that something that I had sent off? I'm just trying to think of how long ago this was from
This
and
was
why we
from
would have
that.
broke.
So Todd,
I'm
I
sorry.
can answer that. It's from the 2019 economic report that's being updated currently.
Oh, okay. It's coming from that report.
So I've got a related question. This is Matt Clifford, but if it helps to clarify, because I raised this before and I don't honestly understand, but like that first line of everything in here is agricultural. And would I be right to assume that within the agricultural, some of those are appropriative agricultural rights and some are riparian rights, or is that not correct?
Well, that's what you can't tell from the way they're listing it.
Right.
Yeah. Shall we?
I feel like
Todd,
maybe
yeah,
riparian means something else in this context.
Matt, can you hold on? I just wanted to see if we could hear more from our Sonoma Water folks on clarifying that.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I don't know if I can clarify that right now, as far as why this riparian category exists back for this 2019 report, I'd have to go back and research that. I mean, one of the things with agriculture, if we're looking at predominantly, summertime irrigation diversions, we're it's going to be appropriative. Well, what do I say there? Yeah, there's less riparian water available in the summertime, right? So basically that water supply is drying up in the summer. So So, but again, getting back to the point of the categories of use first, and then why riparian is in there separate, I'd have to research that.
Maybe you
But-
could also let us know what uncategorized is, because it's pretty high in some of these sections, like Healdsburg Reach, 1,857 acre feet. That's quite a bit.
Yes, yes, it is. And that's based on you know, the overall, the background on this is it's based on a water balance calculation. So yeah, we do have some, yeah, some of those kind of unknowns that became, especially down that Healdsburg Reach, which became quite large.
Oh, so that might actually be ET losses rather than a water use number?
I believe we have an estimated ET, so it could be, you know, as far as uncategorized, maybe more so related to localized groundwater pumping, might be one of those. But ET is actually, and yeah, ET is one of those things that we account for in that water balance analysis that we did.
As uncategorized? Where else is
Uncategorized,
it?
uncategorized was the residual. Uncategorized was the residual. We were looking at documentation of, say, when it comes to M&I, we were looking at public water systems on the main stem and identifying that as a portion of the reach losses that were being observed. So we were able to pull that in. Agriculture, yeah, like I said, I'll have to go back and we can provide some additional documentation of, you know, what those numbers mean. And as I'm thinking about this, riparian could be a reference to the ET, the riparian vegetation. That would make more sense. I was looking at this with respect to the riparian designation on this side there about water rights, but that is most likely what that number is representing is riparian vegetation. So our ET,
Oh,
I know that was part of the analysis that was done.
Well, that seems important.
boy, because
that seems like
that confuses things a lot. I was assuming that was actually water right holders.
No.
Yeah,
no,
it would make
Yeah,
it would make sense, and so that's what I'm thinking about. That's probably the riparian vegetation, because that was part of this analysis.
So can we get
Right.
that research? Thank you for pointing that out, Todd.
Yeah.
yeah.
But
Yeah,
I would also, so if we do that, I also think, David, just looking at this, we ought to make clear that for the reaches, I know for the water nerds, it's obvious, but that's actually acre feet. That's not number of water rights in each one of the reaches. And I think we need to.
Yeah, correct. And again, this is just a sloppy graphic.
Yeah.
But if indeed this is not riparian water rights, we've got to relabel that, and I would remove, because it's I don't know that it's all that relevant.
It's that
to have
darn riparian
Yeah,
vegetation.
right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
If we just stopped growing, we wouldn't have this problem.
Right. Okay. Just a quick time check. We're at 12:52, so a few more minutes before we move into the wrap up. Over to you, Glenn.
Yeah, I would keep riparian. It's a withdrawal. You can't balance the equation without every withdrawal and every input. So you need riparian in there. I would keep it.
Yeah.
One bit of confusion for people looking at this for the first time. You don't actually specify what the units are of the numbers you use.
I did in previous slides that you just didn't see. We
Okay.
can repeat it.
Just put a little footnote that says all in acre feet.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. Beth?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that about the acre feet. That would be much appreciated. Also, this Redwood Valley section here.
Mm-hmm.
Where is this 1,000, almost 2,000 acre feet coming from?
I believe that's coming from the flood control district. That's my understanding, but I'm not authoritative on that.
And is this a year?
Yes.
Well, I know that's not correct. We can have a conversation offline about Redwood Valley, or as far as like how the flood control district is involved, and then maybe Adam Gaska is on the call as well. He's the president of the Redwood Valley Board, Water Board, so that might be helpful as well.
Yeah, let's do that.
Reflecting properly, yeah.
All right. Thanks for that, Beth. And last, Terry.
Oh, hi. I just had a quick question referencing something that was said earlier about the many different sources of water rights. So I think for clarification, perhaps we should say Russian River state water rights in the headers to clarify that these are only state water rights that are being referenced and not all water rights, including tribal and federal.
That's a good point. Oh, crud. Hold on a second.
And David, while you're just making notes here, we, on a prior slide, on an earlier discussion, we have suggested to change it to trans-basin. Here we're saying interbasin. So we'll just go through and be consistent with what we're calling the transfer.
Yep. Fair enough. Glenn, do you have a comment? Or is just a residual hand?
No, and the last one, a water board employee reminded me that when we use water right, we are referring to state created rights of use. We're not referring to tribal or federal. And I think we had a slide earlier that we're going to be referring to that talks about preemptive or overarching water obligations, federal.
Yeah.
That's where tribal rights, etc., would be. There would be overarching obligations before you even get to the state water right allocation.
Yeah, I think we should really always refer to them as state water rights, just for clarity's sake. I mean, when we are talking about this category.
Exactly.
If it's okay, I want to power on.
Yeah. So David, this is probably the last slide before we wrap up.
Yep.
Just a couple minutes.
Essentially, we have other slides we talk about, but we just wanted to show you, okay, here's what things look like without the transfer in place.
So this is the same information on the left, it's just the text is different.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
And we may, in fact, on the second slide, we may, in fact, remove some of the other stuff just because it's so distracting to the eye. The important thing is the concepts in the bullets and making sure people don't have a allergic reaction. Questions, comments? Okay, so the idea is there's lots of other things we can discuss. There's lots of other slides you didn't even see. If you have time on Wednesday, I realize that's a significant amount of time, even if you can only make it for part of it. I think it would add value to the presentation to get your perspectives and feedback. So hopefully we can continue there. Thank you all so far.
Oh, David, we've got one more hand from Beth here before we adjourn.
Sorry.
Yeah, that fourth bullet under the second bullet, all water right holders were curtailed for months. That's not correct. That's not fully correct.
I should say all appropriated and riparian.
No, there were only curtailments in specific years.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, absolutely. I didn't mean to say curtailed the whole time. Yeah, it was only for a few months. It's like.
Oh, okay, I see. That's a little confusing. I immediately what I read was that there were curtailments in all of 19 through 22. Okay,
yeah,
I understand what you're saying. It is a little.
Yeah, but
I
need to fix that.
You could just say in some months. That's accurate, and it's less ambiguous.
Or you could say in the most recent drought, all water right holders were curtailed in months of.
In some months, yeah.
Okay, that's an easy change. Okay, let me hand the microphone back.
All right. Thanks, David. So as David mentioned, we have scheduled a meeting for 1 to 3 p.m. and we sent an email out about that this morning. That's this coming Wednesday, an additional session if you'd like to talk further about this, about the work product. We're scheduled to have a presentation at the next planning group meeting, which is currently scheduled for November 2nd. On Thursday, we don't have the time fixed, but we'll send that out as soon as we have it. And then the next meeting of this group is November 13th at the same time. And the idea is it would be at a near final work product, reviewing that with this group. And any questions about that?
Actually, I just have a statement, which is even though we're going to be going before the planning group, hopefully in November, this has got to be a living presentation. Don't think of this as final. It's going to be updated at least once every month, 6 weeks, as new information comes in. So bear with us. We're hoping to plug the holes as we get more data.
Thanks, David. Just to review a couple of the action items here, we have Laurel to send David the USGS study on the Alexander Valley and the Ukiah Valley study. Todd to follow up on the definitions of, in particular, the riparian and uncategorized uses and the data shown on the demand by reach, and Beth to follow up offline with David regarding Redwood Valley.
Glenn Spain
and Adam.
To provide some history on Eel,
Yes.
Eel River fisheries before 1900.
Yes, thanks for missing that, or sorry for missing that, Glenn. Thanks for that. And that is it. We're at time. Thanks everyone for joining. And we'll follow up with the meeting summary and posting materials to the website.